All right, let's take a look at example 9, because sometimes there's some strange things that happen because of that restricted range of our inverse functions. And this example just sort of illustrates that. So normally, when we have an inverse, if we take the f of f inverse of x, we should get x, right? And if we take f inverse of f of x, we should also get x, okay? So that's what you'd expect, but be careful with these inverse sine or these inverse trig functions, not just inverse sine, but any inverse trig function, because sometimes, because of the restricted range, we get some strange things going on. So just be careful. All right, so this first example, this part A, we're looking for the sine of the inverse sine of 1/2, okay? So I'm going to work from the inside out, okay? So I'm first of all going to find the angle that has a sine value of 1/2, okay? So if I come out here and draw that on my unit circle, I know that a sine value, that's the y coordinate of 1/2, corresponds to an angle of pi over 6, right? So this is pi over 6. So this becomes essentially the sine now. If I replace the sine inverse of 1/2, which is the inside function there, that sine inverse of 1/2 is pi over 6. So now I can rewrite this as the sine of pi over 6. And you can see that the sine of pi over 6 is 1/2. So that makes sense, right? We took the f of f inverse, and we got the same thing out again. We got x, which in this case was 1/2. Okay, so that makes sense. Let's take a look at this next one. We have the inverse sine of the sine of 5 pi over 6. All right. So again, I'm gonna draw my unit circle with some coordinate axes. And where is 5 pi over 6? Well, 6 pi over 6 would be pi, so it's pi over 6 shy of pi, right? It's right there, and the reference angle is pi over 6. And so if I look at the sine of pi over 6, which is the y coordinate, that's going to be 1/2. So I'll replace the sine of 5 pi over 6 with 1/2. So I have the sine inverse of 1/2, right? Because the sine of 5 pi over 6 is 1/2. Now, what is the inverse sine of 1/2? Okay, so I'm looking for an angle now that has a sine value of 1/2. But don't forget that the inverse sine is restricted in range to between minus pi over 2 and pi over 2 on this half of the circle. All right, so in that half of the circle, the angle that has a sine value of 1/2 is actually pi over 6. So the answer to this is pi over 6, not 5 pi over 6. Okay, and it's because of that restricted range. So here we took f inverse of f of x. We're getting something that's not quite the same thing. We're not getting 5 pi over 6. You would expect to get 5 pi over 6. But because of that restricted range, now the answer is actually pi over 6, because the angle has to be restricted between minus pi over 2 and pi over 2. All right, so just a word of caution when you're doing these problems. Always remember your restricted range for these inverse functions. All right, well, that's all I have for this lecture, and I will see you in class.